There was this whole myth of China, they're overtaking the U.S. in GDP. I never thought that would happen. I still don't. Um, they're going to be on the cutting edge technology, AI, quantum computing, et cetera. Their military is growing fast. It's all not true. I mean, yeah, okay, they've made technological advances, give them credit. They are building up the military. But I mean, they've got one aircraft carrier and it doesn't go anywhere. It sails around for show. They're still training pilots to land on the things. But China has much worse problems and much more embedded problems. So we all know about the real estate collapse, and the communist leadership keeps saying, well, throw them a little stimulus or force the banks to give the developers some loans to finish the homes. So they have a different mortgage system in China. There, you borrow the money and you sign the mortgage note, but there's no house. The developer takes the money and builds the house and delivers it to you, and then you move in. But you already signed the note. What happened was, it's kind of like FTX. The developers were taking the money and using it, either stealing it or using it to prop up other enterprises and not delivering the homes, particularly when real estate values started to collapse. And by the way, the supply chain shortages kicked in. So there were kind of mini riots and protests over that. So they're like, we'll call the bank, well, okay, now lend the developers some money so they can finish the homes so we don't have a riot from mortgagors who didn't get their homes. That only gets you so far. It doesn't prop up prices. It doesn't make people want to go out and buy another house when they've already been defrauded on the first one. And how are you going to pay back the loan? Because these developers are already insolvent. So these are band-aids, so to speak, but that's not going to work. But that's only one of their problems. 50% of the water in China is like laced with cyanide. I mean, undrinkable, unusable, even as recycled wastewater. The demographic implosion, there's nothing like it. You can look at the Black Death as a model, approximately 30% of the population of Europe dying out in a 2 to 3 year period. It was very good for workers, by the way, because returns to labor went up and returns to capital went down for 75 years after the Black Death, because there was a shortage of labor. You actually had to pay people to work. So that's the closest example we have, but doesn't quite capture what's going on in China. Between now and 2075, their population may go from 1.4 billion to perhaps 800 million or even less. There are fancy equations and descriptions of GDP. You can get as complicated as you want, but there's a simple two-part definition, which is how many people are working, how productive are they? Labor force times productivity, that equals nominal GDP. Well, if your labor force is imploding by 600 million and your productivity is going down for other reasons, that's an economy that's on the brink of collapse. So the question is, will China invade Taiwan? Will China engage in more provocative acts in the South China Sea, et cetera? Similar to the turning points that the German Empire and Kaiser Wilhelm II had to confront in 1914, and the Japanese, Tojo and the military in Japan in 1941. And the answer is, you may not be as strong as the guy you're confronting, but it might be as good as it gets. In other words, if you're still on the if you're on the uptrend, you're gaining strength, why would you start a war? You wouldn't. You'd wait. Like, hey, why don't I get a little stronger, even stronger if things are going my way? But if you think you've peaked and your opponent is getting stronger, the conclusion is, even though I'm relatively weaker, I might as well attack now because this is as good as it gets. And so Japan launched World War II in the Pacific with the attack of Pearl Harbor, and Germany launched World War I in league with Austria and other allies. As the situation escalated in 1914. But the point being, the German Navy wasn't as strong as the Royal Navy, never was, but it was as strong as it was going to get, at least in the short run on a relative basis. So China may be extremely dangerous, but it doesn't mean if things continue, they're taking over the world. They've got environmental, demographic, financial, governance, and other policies that are almost designed to cause the country to collapse. So I guess you can say I'm not bullish on China. Your point about the demographics is a big one in terms of productivity, because dementia, Parkinson's disease, and Alzheimer's are all highly correlated with age. It's just a fact. And all three of those diseases are progressive, meaning they get worse and they're not curable. So not only is the population declining, but when you look at the age cohorts, the older population is increasing. So you have a declining overall population with an increasing cohort of people who are going to be in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. By the way, same thing in Japan, same thing elsewhere around the world. We don't have to pick on China. So now your cohort of, say, 25 to 54 prime working age is shrinking as a percentage of the whole because the population's aging. But more and more of those workers, again, between 25 and 54, have to be involved in home care, basically taking care of the older people. And that is a very worthy occupation, but it does not lend itself to productivity gains. Taking a bath hasn't changed in 5,000 years. In 1870, we got indoor plumbing, hot water, great. That's a big deal. But that was the last technological improvement in bathing. So if the older population is increasing as a percentage, which it is, and more of the working age population have to take care of the older population, which they do. Robots don't do baths. It's got to be a caretaker, caregiver. Then your available prime working age population is shrinking even more. So again, this is another indicator of coming economic collapse. I would make one distinction between Russia and China. The same demographics are true in Russia. That's absolutely correct. But Russia has enormous strategic depth and enormous natural resources, and China does not. I had this conversation with Sakakibara-san. He was the assistant finance minister in the 80s. He was very famous. He was known as Mr. Yen at the time. But we were in Korea having lunch, and I was talking about Japan. You have these demographic trends, your debt to GDP ratio is triple anyone else. Your population is declining. You've been in basically a depression for 30 years, 3 lost decades. I said, how does that work out? And he said, what you're missing is that our overall growth rate is declining. We're in recession, but our per capita numbers are much stronger because our population is shrinking. And of course, he's right. And I said, yeah, got it. But I raised the ante. I said, so the end game is there's one person left in Japan and they own the whole country. I don't think he thought that was humorous, but it makes the point, Japanese sense of humor is a little different, but it makes the point that you do have to think of things on a per capita basis, not just on a gross basis. And you have to factor in efficiency and natural resources. But China doesn't have either one. And Russia does in one way, and Japan does in another way. China never got out of the middle income trap. And when I studied economics and studied all along, but development economics in particular in graduate school, we thought at the time that the hard part was going from poor to middle. That was really hard, and you had the takeoff theory and a lot else. But once you got to middle, you were kind of on your way to high income. Turns out that's not true. Poor to middle is actually very straightforward. You just move people from farms to cities, you get Lego style manufacturing jobs, you combine that with foreign capital. It's not high tech, but it is high productivity. Crank it out, run a trade surplus and reinvest, and you're on your way. Poor to middle is easy. Turns out that what's hard is going from middle to high, going from 10,000 per year per capita income to 20,000, which is regarded as high income. US is like 75,000 or whatever. That's hard because it's not the rural to urban Lego manufacturing model doesn't work. You need value-added technology. You need high tech. And that's why China's been stealing it, but they've shown very little capacity to create it. Germany can, Japan can, US can, and others. China has not shown that ability. So they're stuck at a time when everything else is going against them. Japan can muddle through, Germany can muddle through a little bit. China has no way out.